Who was Jeremiah G. Hamilton? He first turns up in New York City in 1828 as a 20-year-old, running a cargo of counterfeit coin for a consortium of New York merchants down to Haiti, the Black Republic. They get caught down there, and Jeremiah Hamilton escapes. He's hidden by black fishermen around Port-au-Prince Harbour for a few days before he can get back on a New York-bound brig and get back to New York. And there was a considerable kerfuffle in the newspapers back in New York about this, because it was seen as undermining America's trade, because the North is trying to trade with Haiti. Freedom's Journal, the first black newspaper, hated Jeremiah Hamilton because he was undermining that Black Republic. He then probably moves to New York in the early 1830s, probably 1833, I think, and he struggles for a while trying to make ends meet, trying to get ahead. He's like everyone else in the dynamically growing metropolis of New York City at the time. He eventually does establish himself and get ahead, and he does it through, he has a close link with the insurance companies, the marine insurance companies. In fact, the marine insurance companies begin to found their own associations and talk to one another, in part because of Jeremiah Hamilton. What he specialised in was over-insuring boats and then sending them to the bottom of the ocean, and then claiming insurance on them. By 1836, all the marine insurance companies in New York City had come to an arrangement amongst themselves that no cargo or ship that had any link whatsoever to Jeremiah Hamilton would be insured by them. He still manages to get around that in quite complicated and very, very, very clever ways. By about 1835, 1836, he's established himself in New York City, and he does what every other tyro businessman does in New York City in 1836. In 1836, New York City, and America actually, is undergoing a real estate frenzy. Prices are just going they're skyrocketing everywhere. And for really the only time in his business career, Hamilton follows the herd and jumps in, and he buys real estate. He buys 47 lots of land over in Astoria, but he also buys up in Poughkeepsie. He buys several acres of land in Poughkeepsie, the township. He buys the Mansion House, which is perhaps the flashiest house in Poughkeepsie. He buys a 400-foot-long wharf with 3 buildings on it. So he's actually going long on real estate, and he buys about 3 or 4 weeks short of the top of the real estate market, and it's going to go bust. And he had borrowed money. Like falling real estate prices and mortgages are an unholy combination, as we've seen repeatedly actually since then. What actually happened then is that Hamilton, for the next 5 years, is fending off creditors who are after him. He is one of thousands of New Yorkers who are on the verge of bankruptcy. He actually takes advantage of the new federal legislation that comes through in 1842, and it's a new bankruptcy law which is rather more forgiving of the bankrupted and is not so good for the creditors. I think it was the 3rd day that the new law operates, Hamilton went in and declared himself bankrupt. The thing about Hamilton, he's black. He's a pioneer. He's the only black man doing this sort of stuff down in Wall Street. And if you think about the first black baseball player in the major leagues, the first black whatever, usually they have to appear in the most deferential fashion, and they're sort of feeling their way because there's no one really to tell them how things operate. The thing that's really interesting about Hamilton is that he knows his way around. And he he knows his way around Wall Street in the most interesting fashion. So he declares himself bankrupt, but then his assets are sold, and he knows that they're sold. So his real estate that he had paid something like $35,000 for in 1836, and it's worth a lot less now in 1842, he goes along to the bankrupt sale and he buys it back for $20. And again, this is an insider. There are a whole bunch of people who are buying up bankrupt stock because there's, day after day of bankrupt people, all their chattels and holdings are being sold. And there are people organised amongst themselves to buy it. He goes in, clearly talks to these people, makes sure no one drives the price up, and buys it back, as I said, for $20. He then hits the stock exchange in a big way. Now, he's been buying and selling shares in the 1830s, but his second fortune is on the back of working in the stock exchange, of buying and selling shares. And again, if you're a black man buying and selling shares, dealing with basically a lily-white world, you have to be sharper and quicker than everyone else. And if you hit Hamilton, he hit you back and added 10% for interest. He is not a backward stepping individual. In 1845, the second board of the stock exchange here passes a resolution that anyone who buys or sells shares from Jeremiah Hamilton will be expelled from the stock exchange. And again, the two institutions, the insurance company and the stock exchange, both put, to coin a phrase, a black ban on Jeremiah Hamilton. It can hardly be coincidence that he is black. So there's discrimination. It's not a level playing field. On the other hand, for the most part, the white businessmen are more interested in the colour of his money than the colour of his skin. He is innovative as well in the way he deals on the stock exchange. So he forms what is called a pool, which is very similar, a very simple, similar version of a hedge fund, in which people put in money, and then he is in charge of that money and uses it as leverage to borrow more money, and then takes an aggressive position in the market. So what you have is prominent white New Yorkers trusting the judgment of a black man as to what stocks, mostly railroad and steamship companies, stocks to buy and sell. One of his customers was, who actually ends up suing him, was actually the librarian at the New York Society Library for 50 years, who ended up, he had $1,000 which he invests with Hamilton, and he is the reason why, or an explanation of why hedge funds only deal with multimillionaires rather than small fry, because he kept on changing his mind. He's the sort of person, he's not a professional investor. He drives people nuts, and there was a long court case out of this. The other thing that Hamilton did was he would buy shares in a company, then sue the company and try to bring in a receiver to have all the assets of the company sold and redistributed to the shareholders themselves. So he does this with the Poughkeepsie Silk Company, and he does it with the Accessory Transit Company, which gets him into a pitched battle with Cornelius Vanderbilt. And when Cornelius Vanderbilt dies, there's a really interesting obituary which said that Cornelius Vanderbilt feared no one, but when it came to a stock market battle, there was one person he respected, and it was Jeremiah Hamilton. It doesn't mention that he's black, but he was.